Hello, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today I got something very special for you guys. We're gonna jump straight into what is Guardians of Liberty. Now, Guardians of Liberty is a freedom of the press, freedom of the press, and the nature of news. So, in a way, Guardians of Liberty are the reporters, the news reporters, the journalists who step up in the game of reporting exactly what's going on in the world. Now, America is built on the freedom of press and the news that gets gathered from these brave news reporters. So then, let us learn about the nature. Today I will be explaining to you about the nature under my explanatory. So let us jump straight into the plot of this book. This book is pretty nice. Again, this book is by Linda Barrett Osborne. So, for over 200 years, freedom of the press has been a fundamental ideal of the United States. Allowing people to publish news, ideas, and opinions without censor or interference, even if what they're reporting is contentious, was so important to the founders of this nation that they placed a guarantee in the First Amendment to the Constitution. Citing many examples from America's history, from the American Revolution to the Civil War, and from Vietnam to the presidencies of Barack Obama and Donald Trump, acclaimed author Linda Barrett Osborne shows how a free press has played an essential role in the growth of this nation and allowed democracy to flourish. With today's new technologies affecting how media is delivered, sometimes fierce public debate surrounding what constitutes free speech, and more division in our news and politics than ever before, Guardians of Liberty reminds readers that everyone has a right to convey the news and express opinions, no matter how strongly we disagree with one another. So, for over 200 years, America has given us the U.S. Constitution, with the First Amendment being the freedom of speech. Today is Saturday, January I believe the 22nd. Now, if it is the 22nd, I tell you that the most popular news, and today's the year 2022. The most popular news internationally, meaning just in the United States, in all 50 states, it could still be CNN News. Don't quote me on this, but it could be CNN News. But here's where we're going to get into these beautiful quotes of the day. Again, this is my YouTube channel, so if you're here because you're here with a willing heart to understand me and my comprehension of today's modern society. So, here we go. This book is for Lily and her generation, that they may grow up in a country that values honesty and freedom of expression. Look at that, Lily. Actually, my mom's name is Liliana. But right here it says four-letter word, Lily. Maybe this video is for my mom when she learns English in the future. So it says here, the book of contents, chapter 1. We're going to jump straight into chapter 1. Chapter 1, it says the 18th century partisan press and revolution. Let's go straight to chapter 1. I'm going to skip the introduction because I know the introduction is pretty nice and sweet. It talks about Washington, talks about the Confederacy. And boy, do I love history. I love so much history. I love the history of the United States in specific, because I like feeling very well informed, especially when you're well dressed and in a suit and well dressed. But the reason why I'm not well dressed right now is because I'm a little bit of a bum right now. B-U-M, bum. Don't have enough money. So I try to compare myself in this situation I'm in to the further situation I'm gonna be in the future, I hope. So here we go. Chapter 1. The 18th century partisan press and revolution. The 18th century. The 18th century partisan president revolution. John Peter Sanger had been in jail for 8 months when on August the 4th, 1735, he was put on trial for printing harsh words about the British governor of New York. The United States did not exist then. The British king had appointed a royal governor to rule some of the colonies. In this case, it was William Cosby, who was angry because Sanger's newspaper, the New York Weekly Journal, had said he was greedy and selfish and that he denied people their liberties. In 1735, New York and the other colonies followed English law, although they had legislatures made up of colonial settlers. They thought of themselves as enlightened men and women who happened to live far away from the mother country. For many years, nothing could be published in Britain without a government license. Anything that was written could be censored by the governor and would never appear in print. By the time of Sanger's trial, that had changed. There was no more government censorship in England that kept an article or opinion from being printed. But once it was printed, the printer could be fined or sent to jail for saying negative things about the king, or the British Parliament, or any government official. For example, a colonial governor like Cosby, the crime of publishing strong criticism of the government was called serious libel. Serious libel was thought to put the society of the government and therefore the country in danger. The tradition of English law said that it did not matter if what was printed was true or false. In fact, it was worse if the negative comments were true. No one needed to take false statements seriously, but true statements, if they were proof and accepted as true, gave the people even more reason to criticize the government and perhaps overthrow it. The people should not be called to account for possessing the people with an ill opinion of the government. No government can subsist, stated John Hall, a judge in England in 1704, for it is very necessary for all governments that the people should have a good opinion of it. For Hall, in English law, any writing that questions the behavior of the government has always been looked upon as a crime. Therefore, the author of something true could be punished with heavier fines and longer jail sentences than the author of something false. Now come John Peter Sanger's case in 1735, heard before a court set up by Governor William Cosby. Sanger had printed the New York Weekly Journal, but he did not write the words that bothered Cosby. Cosby could not know who had actually written the words. In colonial America, many authors used pen names different from their real names. Some used more than one pen name so that it would look like different people had expressed the same opinion. Readers might guess who the real authors were, but courts could not prove who actually wrote the articles. Instead, they brought the printer to trial. Sanger was a German immigrant who ran his press as a business, printing other people's work and not his own, although Cosby had offered a reward of £50, today nearly worth $13,000. To anyone who could name the authors, no one identified them. At the trial, New York's Attorney General Richard Bradley represented the government. Bradley spoke to the 12-man jury. Women did not serve on juries at the time. He called Sanger a serious person and a frequent printer and publisher of false news and serious libels, who had wickedly and maliciously meant to do harm to Cosby's reputation. The jury's only job was to decide if Sanger had actually printed the articles. Judges would decide whether this was serious libel and what the punishment should be. The lawyer who represented Sanger, Andrew Hamilton, no relation to Alexander Hamilton, had come from Pennsylvania. He was known throughout the colonies for his legal skill. He astonished everyone in court by agreeing that Sanger was the printer. Attorney General Bradley then told the jurors that they had to find Sanger guilty and reminded them that under British law, their law, Sirius Liberal, was worse if what was printed was true rather than false. Hamilton asked if the jury really believed that truth is a greater sin than falsehood. He argued, "It is natural, it is a privilege. I will go further, it is a right, which all free men claim that they are entitled to complain when they are hurt. They have a right publicly to fight back against the abuses of power in the strongest terms, to put their neighbors on their guard against the open violence of men in authority, and to assert with courage the sense they have of the blessings of liberty. The question before the court and you, gentlemen of the jury, is not of small or private concern. It is not the cause of one poor printer, nor of New York alone, which you are now trying. No, it may affect every free man that lives under a British government, under the main of America. It is the best cause. It is the cause of liberty." The jury believed that Singer had indeed printed the truth, and more important, that this was no crime. It returned a verdict of not guilty. When did the Cosby government accept the decision and free Singer? Perhaps the court in Cosby realized that public opinion was for Singer. To go against it could well cause greater conflict. More and more the colonists were discussing the meaning of freedom and their relationship to Britain. The outcome of the Singer trial did not change the law of Sirius Liberal. But after that, no printers or authors in America were charged in colonial courts for criticizing the royal government. While Singer was in jail, his wife Anna had taken over printing the New York Weekly Journal until the trial was over. When John Peter died in 1746, Anna took over and, unafraid, continued to criticize the British government. In the 18th century, women edited some 16 out of a total of 78 family-owned weekly newspapers printed in the colonies. They had included Elizabeth Timothy, Anne Catherine, Huff Green, Clementina, Bert Wren, and Mary Catherine Gothard, who printed the first newspaper that carried the names of all but one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. The signers had not wanted their names published when the Declaration was first made because they were basically committing treason against the British king. In 1777, Gothard was allowed to publish a broadside of the Declaration with their names. A line at the bottom read, "Printed by Mary Catherine Gothard." Hers is the only woman's name printed on a copy of the Declaration of Independence. In the years between the Singer case and the Declaration of Independence in 1776, the number of newspapers in the colonies increased. The Boston Newsletter, founded in 1704, was the first newspaper to successfully print for several years, and the only newspaper until 1719, when the Boston Gazette began printing. By 1740, 5 years after Singer's trial at 16, weekly newspapers were published in the colonies. By 1775, the number had grown to 37. In March 1765, the British Parliament passed a law that had a huge impact on printers. The Stamp Act called for a tax on paper used in the colonies to print everything from legal documents to land deeds to playing cards and newspapers. Each piece of paper had to come from England, where it was officially stamped. Money from the tax would pay for thousands of soldiers to guard the boundary with colonies claimed by the French in America. Colonists did not want to pay for housing. British soldiers, they did not believe they were in danger from French attacks. More important, Parliament passed the act with no say from the colonists, who served in colonial legislatures. The colonists called in taxation without representation. Cadwallader Colden, the alarmed royal lieutenant governor of New York, sent a report to Britain about the terrible articles appearing in colonial newspapers. He said they were filled with every falsehood that malice could invent to serve the purpose of exciting the people to disobedience of the laws and to sedition. The newspapers were expressing what the colonists were feeling, anger at the royal government for not giving them a voice. In making the laws that applied to them, a secret organization called the Sons of Liberty, formed in 1765, the group opposed the Stamp Act, but its aims were bigger, to guarantee freedom in every way for the 13 colonies. The day before the Stamp Act went into effect, the Pennsylvania Journal printed thick black lines around its pages. As if mourning a person's death, instead of a stamp, the newspapers printed a skull where the stamp should be. A coffin appeared on the last page, explaining how the paper had died because of an illness, a stamp in her vital organs. The New Hampshire Gazette set off itself. I must die or submit to that which is worse than death, be stamped and lose my freedom. Several colonial newspapers defied the act after stamps were required. They continued to publish without them. Opposition from the colonies was so strong that Parliament repealed the Stamp Act 1 year later. In March 1766, this victory encouraged the colonial press. Printers realized that they could break the law and not be punished. Their power came from royal governors, fear that attacking the press might lead the public to attack them. A few printers brought before colonial legislature, but none were fined or sent to jail. The press that opposed the Stamp Act supported the growing call for a break with Britain. These colonists came to be known as Patriots or Whigs after the Liberal British Party. But there were those who wanted to remain a British colony. They were called the Loyalists or Tories. After 1776, Loyalists also printed newspapers that opposed the Patriots and supported the British government. So this is where the federal government starts. So, in today's society, there seems to be states. Okay? There is states. And within those 50 states, there is a governor put into place for every state. And from there it starts leading down like a tree. He's the representative of the state. In the state, there is senators. And so on and so forth. But here's where the federal government, here's where the IRS starts coming in. It starts coming in from a British government, which leads to the IRS becoming the federal government, an entity that the state cannot touch. And this is where the problem starts with inflation and prices going up. The problem is not in America, it's in Europe, where all the parliaments are. Now the British Parliament, they have already inquired the other nations that are in Europe as part of their United States of Europe. They are starting to gather Germans, they are starting to gather the Russians, and they are starting to gather not just Italians, but even Spaniards, people who speak Spanish. And then they dare me. Patriots. Is who will stand in the last day. Now, patriots publicized increasingly supported liberty from Britain and completely supported freedom of the press and their own press. Mobs of patriots attacked loyalists, presses destroying their machinery and attacking the printers themselves. Many loyalist printers fled the cities where they had lived. The Patriot Press reported that a mob fired bullets into the house of one loyalist and obliged him to fly from it to save his life. Another had his gun stolen and one of his fine horses poisoned. A third was confined and bound for 36 hours and not suffered to lie in a bed and threatened to be sent to an underground prison. Some loyalist printers were tarred and feathered, covered with hot wood tar, then with feathers that stuck to the tar and paraded through the streets. For the most part, patriots did not live up to Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr.'s ideal of freedom of the press, to allow freedom for the thought you hate. As the Revolutionary War progressed, more loyalist printers were forced out of business. In May 1775, £100 lawful money reward was offered for the capture of printer Isaac Wilkins, who with a group of loyalists had written, "We are determined at the hazard of our lives and properties to support the king." Wilkins, however, fled to Canada as many loyalists did. Other loyalists were forced to take back what they had said about loyalty to the British government. Their apologies were printed on broadsides and distributed. Newspapers had the apologies of these loyalists from British government. In newspapers and pamphlets and broadsides played a large part in the uniting the colonies. After the war, Founding Father John Adams wrote, "The 13 colonies had grown up under the constitutions of government so different, there was so great a variety of religions. They were composed of so many different nations. Their customs, manners, and habits had so little resemblance, that to unite them in the same system of action was certainly a very difficult enterprise. But printed materials could go along with travelers from colony to colony or be sent through the colonial mail system. People in Massachusetts could not, or people in Massachusetts could read about what people in Virginia were thinking and doing. South Carolina could learn about New Hampshire as long as the press remained free. And newspapers moved freely. Information could help the colonies recognize that they all had the same goal: freedom from Britain. The American Revolution ended in 1783. The colonies won their victory. They became the United States. Each new state wrote its own constitution about how it would be governed. By 1791, 9 of the 13 states had named freedom of the press as a right. Freedom of the press is one of the greatest bulwarks of liberty. Stated the Virginia Constitution in familiar words, and can never be restrained but by despotic, tyrannical governments. Massachusetts Constitution declared the liberty of the press is essential to the security of freedom in a state. It ought not therefore to be restrained. But the Constitution of the United States, approved by the majority of states in 1788, did not mention press freedom. It told the government should be organized, but it did not state specific rights that the people should have. After more than 2 years of debate, the 10 amendments known as the Bill of Rights were added in 1791. The First Amendment states, "Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances." Freedom of the press was paired with freedom of speech. speech for the spoken word, press for the printed word. Sometimes it is hard to draw the line between speech and press, but both are protected. They both come under the category of freedom of expression. The First Amendment applied only to federal laws made by Congress. Many states were able to pass laws against press freedom. These could only be challenged in federal courts after the 14th Amendment, passed in 1868, gave all American citizens equal protection under the law. How strong would the First Amendment be? Since 1791, presidents, lawmakers, courts, the military, journalists, and ordinary Americans have given different answers to that question. How strong will the First Amendment be? Think about that question. If the First Amendment means the freedom of speech, right? So if you're in this country, you believe that you have freedom of speech, right? And you are being obliged to be removed from this country when you've been here for more than half of your life, then tell me, what is this country if they do not respect the very right that this country gives every single human being? Now remember, U.S. citizenship is a term that the government made to label you as a product of their government. Now keep in mind, you're either an American, a patriot, or you're a British Parliament production, also known as a citizen. So if you have a Social Security and you're paying taxes, well, hey, you're helping out the nation. Good job. You're helping keep police guarding our communities. Good job. That's a good thing. May God bless you. You're keeping firefighters out and about to turn off the fires. Which here in California, there's firefighters that actually turn on fires on purpose so that they could keep running their budgets that they have. They're overflowing budgets because they're actually overflooded with funds. And they call it exercise. They call it training exercise. And it might be good. They burn the mountain so that the green grass won't burn later on during the summer. Because in California it's too hot. So they purposely let the fire keep burning further out so that way that mountain could stay burned. Could only be dirt. Now if you pay taxes, well, good job. You keep paramedics. You keep the ambulance available at your disposal when you call. Good job. But remember, that's state tax right there. But when you're paying federal taxes, not only is this money going to the British Parliament in Europe, because the IRS is no longer in the USA, and the USA is now being bought like a puppet, it is your choice to either be a patriot in today's society or be a part of the puppet mastery that is upon us. Now again, if you're on my YouTube channel, it's because you're trying to understand what I'm trying to visualize in my perspective of my life. For I see things in the eyes of a guardian of liberty.